What happened to the days of knights and castles, when a king could do whatever he wanted, and when lords rode through their estates commanding the peasants to obey? In England and in Europe, the part of the world that we often call the West, those days were fading away. The days of kings and lords first began to lose their brightness when philosophers and scientists realized that the ancient Greeks, who had long been held up as the wisest men in the world, were sometimes wrong. 100 years before William Penn and William and Mary, the Italian scientist Galileo had studied the ideas of the ancient scientists Aristotle and Ptolemy. Both men wrote that the sun went around the earth. But Galileo realized that this idea didn't explain his own observations of the sky. He needed a new theory, and he made one. The earth actually goes around the sun. Galileo was one of the first scientists to use the scientific method. Instead of accepting old ideas, he carefully observed the world around him, and then tried to make a theory that would explain his observations. Almost 100 years later, in 1642, a weak, sickly baby was born in England. His parents didn't expect him to live, but they named him Isaac anyway, like the baby born to Abraham and Sarah in the Bible. Isaac did live. As a matter of fact, Isaac Newton lived to be 84 years old, and he used those 84 years to take Galileo's ideas even further. As he grew, Isaac Newton became more and more curious about how the world worked. He read every book he could find. He did scientific experiments. He tried very hard to turn lead and copper into gold, but he never succeeded. When Isaac was 18, the people of England invited Charles II to reclaim the throne. 3 years later, Isaac Newton went to study science at the University of Cambridge. There, he was told to read the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, but Newton thought that the ideas of modern scientists like Galileo and Copernicus were closer to the truth. In his scientific notebook, Newton wrote, "Amicus Plato, amicus Aristotelis, magis amica veritas." That is Latin for, Plato is my friend, Aristotle is my friend, but my best friend is truth. When Cambridge closed down because of the plague, Isaac Newton went back home. He went on studying the world, trying to figure out why it worked the way it did. While he studied, thought, and wrote, Charles II ruled, grew ill, and then died, and James II came to the throne. One day, Isaac Newton was sitting beside a window, thinking and staring out into the family apple orchards, when he saw an apple fall to the ground. He thought, why does it always fall down? Why doesn't the apple ever fall sideways or up? Some sort of force must be pulling on the apple to make it always fall in exactly the same way. Newton went on observing, doing experiments, and thinking until he was able to describe the force that pulls on the apple. He called it gravity, from the Latin word grave, which means heavy. This heavy force means that large bodies, such as the Earth, have a force that pulls objects toward them. Isaac Newton learned that he could predict, using mathematics, how strong that force would be anywhere in the universe. The next time an apple fell, Newton could tell you exactly how fast it would fall and when it would hit the Earth. Newton's new rules, which we now call the laws of gravity, showed that every motion or action in the universe has a law that governed it. The universe wasn't a huge, mysterious, magical riddle. Instead, people could figure out and even predict ahead of time what would happen. The universe was like a machine that always worked in the same way. In 1687, while James II was still on the throne and growing more and more unpopular for his Catholic ways, Isaac Newton published his ideas in a book called Principia Mathematica, or Principles of Mathematics. Newton's ideas about laws that governed the whole universe didn't just affect other scientists. Other thinkers, such as philosophers, people who think about ideas, economists, people who think about money and how it works, and political philosophers, people who think about the ways countries are governed, began to think that if universal laws governed objects, universal laws also governed people. If they could use the scientific method to observe people and make theories about the ways people acted, Perhaps those universal laws could be discovered. Then, life would no longer be mysterious. They would no longer need to wonder why one country prospered while another became poor, or why one country won a war while another lost. Universal laws would explain all of these things. Another Englishman, John Locke, was determined to discover these universal laws. When the English rebelled against Charles I, John Locke was 17 years old. His father joined the anti-royalist forces and fought against Charles's royal army during the Civil War. After Charles's execution, John Locke went to study at Oxford. He was supposed to study history and Greek philosophy, but like Isaac Newton, John Locke found these ideas old-fashioned. He wanted to experiment in science and read the new ideas of modern philosophers. When Charles II came back to England, Locke had grown to be a man of 28. The king's supporters knew that Locke preferred a commonwealth to a king. Locke was afraid that he might be arrested or even executed. So he left England and visited France, Holland, and other European countries, learning from other scientists and philosophers. He stayed out of England through the reign of James II. When Mary and William came triumphantly to England, John Locke returned to England as part of Mary's royal party. Now that England was a constitutional monarchy, meaning that the king and queen themselves had to obey the laws passed by Parliament, John Locke didn't have to worry about being arrested simply because he preferred one form of government to another. Now, he was free to write down the ideas that he had been thinking about for the past years. In 1690, the year after he returned to England, John Locke published a book called Two Treatises of Government. In his book, John Locke explained that he had discovered universal laws that could predict how people should act. Every man and woman, Locke wrote, was equal. Every human being had, by natural law, the right to seek life, health, liberty, and possessions. No king could claim that God had given him the divine power to execute his subjects, throw them in jail, or take their property. But Locke added that groups of people gathered together into cities or countries need someone to make and enforce laws. So people should join together in groups and draw up a contract. This contract gives some of them power to rule over others, but the rulers can only have as much power as the people are willing to give them. Rulers can't take away the life, health, liberty, and possessions of their subjects. If they destroy, enslave, or impoverish their subjects, the people can join together, announce that the contract isn't valid anymore, throw the rulers out of office, and appoint new rulers. Men under government, Locke wrote, should have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, arbitrary will of another man. In other words, even a king has to obey the laws, or else he loses his throne. John Locke also thought that every ruler would be tempted to abuse his power. So he also wrote that a good government would have three parts. William Penn's colony. One group would make the laws, another group would enforce them, and a third group would be in charge of fighting wars with other countries. That way, no king could ever make laws just for his own good, or start wars simply to make himself richer or more important. Isaac Newton, John Locke, and many other men and women in England and Europe began to accept these ideas about government, and also put to believe that universal laws discovered through observation govern every part of human life. Today, we often talk about these ideas as quote-unquote Western ideas. Sometimes we talk about the years where these ideas became popular as the Enlightenment. But in the days of John Locke, the Eastern countries of the world often did not agree with the West. As a matter of fact, when Japan closed its harbors, one reason was to prevent Enlightenment ideas from coming in, and from encouraging Japanese citizens to question the power of the shogun.